The first sound wasn't a boo. It was a gasp. A sharp, collective inhale from hundreds of people lining Hollywood Boulevard, as if the entire parade suddenly paused for one suspended heartbeat. And in that frozen breath, as the floats sparkled and the Christmas lights flickered across the street, someone whispered a line that would soon echo across every corner of social media. "She's actually walking through the crowd? Why would she risk that?" Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Tell me something. When was the last time you saw a moment where a celebrity miscalculated so publicly, so dramatically, that the fallout began before they even realized what was happening? Because that's what this was. A miscalculation. A decision made in confidence, wrapped in bravado, fueled by the belief that applause was guaranteed. A decision that ignited one of the most shocking moments the Hollywood Christmas parade had ever seen. The kind of moment that people replay over and over, not because it's glamorous, but because it's real in a way celebrities never mean to be. And at the center of it all, Meghan Markle, walking straight down the parade route, smiling, waving, expecting the usual mix of cheers and camera flashes. But before she even reached the midpoint of the boulevard, before the journalists, the influencers, the children perched on their parents' shoulders fully registered what they were seeing, the crowd shifted. The atmosphere thickened. Conversations dropped to whispers. Phones came up. And that's when the first boo finally broke loose. Not loud, not aggressive, not even certain. Just one voice cutting through the music. A single note dropped into the water. Then another. Then another. And suddenly, the 93rd Annual Hollywood Christmas Parade. A place known for holiday spirit, smiling celebrities, and families wrapped in tinsel and cocoa, transformed into something nobody expected. A scene where the audience, for the first time, said exactly what they felt. But here's the real twist. The booing didn't begin when Meghan appeared. It started 10 seconds before she stepped into view. Now, why is that important? Because it means the crowd wasn't reacting to something she did in that moment. They were reacting to something larger. Longer. Built over years. A pressure that had been quietly gathering under the Hollywood surface, whispered in studios, murmured in casting offices, gossiped about in PR circles, vented about in private group chats. By the time Meghan turned that corner and walked between the barricades, the crowd was already primed, already buzzing, already waiting. The booing was already loading in their throats. And before we go any deeper, let me ask you something simple. What does it take for a Hollywood crowd, one trained for decades, to cheer for anybody remotely famous, to boo a princess? What pushes regular people to break the invisible rule of celebrity worship and say publicly, "Enough"? That's what this video is about. Not the scandalous headlines, not the social media edits, not the memes, not the jokes, not the exaggerated versions spread across the internet like wildfire. No, this is about what actually led to this moment. How Hollywood, of all places, arrived at a breaking point. Why the chant, "Yacht Princess, leave," exploded out of the crowd with such force it drowned out the parade music. And what Meghan's reaction really revealed, not just about her public image, but about the entire Hollywood machine around her. Because make no mistake, this wasn't just a few boos. This was a turning point. A moment that insiders had predicted months ago. A moment industry veterans quietly said was inevitable. A moment that hit Meghan and Harry's team like a cold wave, shocking even those who had braced for backlash. But here's where things get even stranger. There's a reason, a very specific one, that Meghan ended up walking through the crowd instead of staying on the celebrity float assigned to her. And that reason is not what you think. But before we get there, let's go back to the beginning of the night. The lights, the music, the crowd slowly filling the streets. The influencers arriving early to secure the perfect angle for their videos. The kids sitting on the curb with glowing Santa hats. Everyone expecting the usual holiday cheer, the classic parade excitement. But among the crowd were whispers. Not loud, not hostile, just curious. Is Meghan really coming? Why would she show up here? Is she riding a float or walking? I heard she changed the plan. She wants to be seen. And that last sentence? That one became important. Because yes, Meghan was scheduled to appear. Yes, the organizers confirmed her attendance. But the way she appeared, that was not the original plan. She wasn't supposed to walk directly through the crowd. She wasn't supposed to break formation. She wasn't supposed to be within arm's reach of spectators and critics and selfie takers and unpredictable voices. Yet she chose to, or someone chose for her. We'll get to that. But first, let's talk about the build-up. The unspoken tension simmering through Hollywood in the months leading up to this parade. A tension that made this moment inevitable. Because here's the truth. Hollywood has changed. And Meghan Markle hasn't adapted to that change. There used to be a time when celebrities could craft images like fairy tales. When publicists could polish the edges. When audiences would clap simply because they were told to. That time is over. Today, Hollywood crowds are sharper. More skeptical. Less forgiving of inconsistencies. Less patient with manufactured narratives. And the more Meghan tried to curate her image, the more the cracks showed. One moment, she's Hollywood royalty. The next, she's a victim of the industry. One moment, she's seeking privacy. The next, she's launching a new public project. To the audience, it felt contradictory. And contradictions build tension. And tension eventually breaks. Which brings us back to the parade. To the lights reflecting off storefront windows. To the crowd buzzing with anticipation. To the camera crews adjusting their angles, waiting for the celebrity highlights. And then, from the far end of the boulevard, the murmurs began. She's coming. She's really walking in. Is she alone? Where's Harry? Why isn't she on the float? Then the gasp. The first one. The one that said, without words, this might not go the way she thinks it will. And with that single inhale, the energy changed. People leaned forward. Phones lifted. Faces tightened. Whispers intensified. Because Meghan wasn't walking with the other celebrities. She wasn't walking within the safety bubble planned for her. She was taking the center lane, alone, through a crowd that was not neutral. You know that moment in a movie when a character walks straight into a situation they don't realize is dangerous, but the audience does? That was this. And here's the craziest part. The booing didn't come from the front row. It didn't come from teenagers. It didn't come from hecklers. It came from the middle of the crowd, from people who looked surprised at themselves for doing it. And then the chant. That infamous chant. Short, sharp, thrown into the air like a spark. Yacht Princess leave. Not multiple voices at first. Just one. One person brave enough, or frustrated enough, to say the quiet part out loud. But that's all a chant needs. One spark. And just like dry leaves catching fire, the chant spread. Yacht Princess leave. Yacht Princess leave. Yacht Princess leave. Louder. Faster. Growing like a wave rolling forward. And as Meghan walked, her smile tightened. Just a fraction, but enough for cameras to catch it. Enough for people to replay it. Enough for body language experts to pause their screens and tilt their heads. Because in that flash of discomfort, something slipped through the cracks. A moment of authenticity no PR team could manage. But the real twist, the one everyone missed in the chaos, wasn't the booing. Wasn't the chanting. Wasn't even Meghan's reaction. It was who started it. Because the first person to boo, the very first voice, wasn't a random stranger. It was someone Meghan recognized. Someone she hadn't expected to see. Someone whose presence alone would have rattled her. Someone who had reason, deep, personal reason, to be standing exactly where they were. And when Meghan's eyes met theirs, everything about her expression changed. Just for a moment. But you'll see exactly what that moment meant in a minute. Because that fleeting look, that shock, that stiffening of her steps, that was just the beginning. What came after? The first time the word boo broke through the air, nobody fully registered it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't coordinated. It was almost accidental, a single, sharp sound cutting through the holiday music and the chatter of the crowd. But for those paying attention, for anyone who had followed Meghan Markle's Hollywood journey closely, it was like a tiny earthquake signaling that something bigger was about to unfold. Ask yourself, when was the last time you saw a moment that felt simultaneously ordinary and explosive? A parade, full of children, families, and celebrities, turned instantly into a stage where the audience dictated the narrative, where a single voice could spark chaos. That's exactly what happened that night, on the glittering streets of Hollywood Boulevard during the 93rd Annual Hollywood Christmas Parade in 2025. The street was a river of light. Christmas lights reflected off glass windows and polished vehicles, flashing across the faces of thousands who had come to watch, to cheer, to capture memories for Instagram, TikTok, and X. Music from the floats blended with the excited murmur of the crowd. Everywhere you looked, cameras, smartphones, and drones painted a moving tapestry of festivity. And then, the anticipation. The subtle tension building as word spread that Meghan Markle, former actress, Duchess-turned-Hollywood figure, was walking through the crowd herself. Not on a float, not shielded, but walking, among them, with cameras capturing every moment. What nobody knew, not even the most seasoned event planners, was that this crowd had been quietly primed. Months of Hollywood chatter, whispers about Meghan's presence at exclusive events, speculation about her Hollywood reintegration, and the controversy surrounding her every move had created a simmering tension. The audience wasn't neutral. They were waiting. And that waiting meant the first boo, quiet, uncertain, almost polite, was a spark in a powder keg. The first voice came from the middle of the street, someone who likely didn't even intend to make a statement. Perhaps they were frustrated. Perhaps they were surprised at themselves. But the sound was unmistakable. And as soon as it left their mouth, the subtle energy of the crowd shifted. Eyes darted around. People tilted their heads. Phones went up. It was contagious, almost magnetic, this realization that someone dared to break the invisible rule of celebrity reverence. Hollywood, after all, is a city that rarely boos. It's trained to clap, to cheer, to smile politely at any public figure. Critics are whispered about behind closed doors, but the public stage is treated like sacred ground. Yet here, on this festive evening, someone had pierced that illusion. And once the first boo emerged, the crowd found its rhythm. Imagine the sensation, a crowd of hundreds, thousands of eyes on Meghan, a parade of floats moving slowly along the boulevard, and suddenly a collective exhale, a mutiny of sorts, erupting in sporadic sounds, shouts, murmurs, half-formed chants. "Yacht Princess, leave," someone yelled, almost teasing at first, but the words found fertile ground. Others picked it up, tentative, hesitant, until it grew into a wave, a chorus that swept across the crowd like wildfire. But what's remarkable isn't just the sound of the boos. It's the reaction of the people witnessing it. Families who had come expecting cheer and sparkle now found themselves leaning forward, whispering to each other, captivated by a drama unfolding in real time. Influencers and content creators immediately sensed that a viral moment was materializing. The phones lifted, cameras focused, angles adjusted. And amidst all of this, Meghan herself kept walking, smiling, waving, maintaining the poise she had cultivated over years in the public eye. But subtle micro-expressions betrayed a flicker of discomfort, a tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. Small, almost imperceptible changes that reveal more than any words could. Ask yourself, have you ever noticed how celebrities react in real time to disapproval? Not the polished, post-event interviews. Not the photoshopped magazine covers. I'm talking about the instant, visceral reactions. That split second where the public's feelings collide with their carefully curated persona. That's exactly what happened here, and for those paying close attention, it was riveting. The booing, however, wasn't just a random eruption. It had context, a build-up. And the first part of that context is Hollywood's long-running tension with Meghan. She's a figure who has constantly straddled two worlds, British royalty and Hollywood insider. She carries the weight of both privilege and scrutiny, and that duality has made her a polarizing figure. For some, she embodies glamour, sophistication, and charm. For others, she represents disruption, contradiction, and entitlement. That tension simmered in this crowd long before the parade lights flickered on. Consider this. The crowd didn't just respond to Meghan herself. They were reacting to the stories they had absorbed over years. Media portrayals, viral social media moments, perceived slights, rumors, public appearances, interviews, and controversial statements. These cumulative experiences created a collective consciousness, a kind of audience memory that shaped real-time reactions. By the time Meghan walked into view, that collective consciousness had already labeled her in a certain way. And when the first voice broke the invisible rule, the crowd felt permission to express what they had been thinking all along. As the initial boost spread, a fascinating thing happened. Crowd dynamics shifted. Individuals who might have hesitated before suddenly found themselves participating. Someone's courage or frustration emboldened others. The chant, "Yacht Princess, leave," started as a murmur, a whispered jest, and grew louder, more rhythmic. In a matter of seconds, the parade's cheerful soundtrack was overlaid with an undercurrent of public judgment, a live commentary that no sound system, no float, no glittering display could drown out. It became a live performance of disapproval, unscripted, raw, and impossible to ignore. And here's the kicker. The very first person to shout wasn't random. Whoever it was, and this is critical, had a connection to Meghan. Someone she knew. Someone whose mere presence would unsettle her. And while the crowd may have assumed the chant was spontaneous, the reality was far more layered. The energy wasn't just reactive. It was intentional, amplified, personalized. The boos carried meaning beyond mere frustration. They carried history. You might wonder, why would someone take such a risk to speak out in front of cameras, journalists, and thousands of onlookers? The answer is partly timing, partly opportunity, and partly the nature of public attention in Hollywood. In a city where appearances are everything, where the spectacle often outweighs substance, the crowd realized that this was a rare chance to be heard, to participate in a narrative usually controlled by agents, publicists, and media outlets. Their voices mattered in that moment, and they knew it. Meanwhile, Meghan continued to walk, outwardly composed but inwardly processing every flicker of energy, every uneven gaze, every raised eyebrow. It's easy to imagine the thought pattern. What is happening? Why now? How did this start? What does this mean for my team? For Harry? For our image? The inner calculus of a celebrity under fire is relentless, instantaneous, and unforgiving. And the tension escalated further because of the crowd's proximity. This wasn't a distant audience separated by barriers and security. Meghan was walking through them, arm's length from her critics. Eye contact possible. The line between celebrity and spectator blurred. The booing, the chants, the judgment, it was tangible, immediate, intimate. This proximity magnified the impact, turning a simple expression of disapproval into a moment of profound vulnerability. Now, here's something many observers missed. The booing also revealed cracks in the coordination of Meghan's own team. Security, PR handlers, and event organizers were caught off guard. They weren't prepared for the crowd's energy to escalate this quickly. Their attempts to shield, redirect, or defuse the situation were subtle, almost invisible, but the moment had already gone viral in spirit. Even if cameras hadn't captured the initial exchange, word of mouth, eyewitness accounts, and social media would ensure that the story spread like wildfire. And here's the final, almost cinematic detail. The first boo, the initial spark, wasn't just noise. It was the opening chord of a symphony that would play out across Hollywood for days. By the time Meghan reached the midpoint of the parade route, every step was being analyzed, every smile scrutinized, every gesture replayed across platforms. The first voice, one person, one spark, had set the stage for a cultural moment that transcended the parade itself. It became a lens through which Hollywood examined celebrity, entitlement, public perception, and the fragility of reputation. But the real twist, the one that made this moment unforgettable, wasn't the booing. It wasn't even the chant. It was who said it first. And why? Because the identity of that person and the connection to Meghan would unravel everything she thought she knew about control, influence, and the power of public perception. The audience was no longer passive. They were active participants. They were shaping the story. And in that split second, the dynamics of celebrity and crowd interaction were rewritten. And as Meghan's eyes scanned the crowd, a flicker of recognition passed across her face. The first person to boo was someone she knew, someone who mattered, someone whose presence wasn't accidental. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where our story truly begins. Hollywood is a city built on two things, dreams and optics. On one side, you have people striving for fame, influence, and connection. On the other, a hypervigilant audience and industry insiders analyzing every action, every word, every photo. And in that world, image isn't just important, it is everything. Lose control of the narrative, and the city, which once celebrated you, will turn faster than you can blink. So when Meghan Markle arrived at the 93rd Annual Hollywood Christmas Parade in 2025, walking directly through the crowd, there was an invisible weight waiting for her. Not just from the booing. Not just from the viral clips. not just from the social media storm, but from years of Hollywood insiders quietly cataloging her moves, her decisions, her statements, and her contradictions. The parade wasn't the start. It was the inevitable climax of a brewing tension. Let's rewind for a moment. Why has Hollywood, which once embraced Meghan as one of their own, suddenly grown hostile? It's a question that requires peeling back layers of reputation management, celebrity politics, and long-standing grudges. First, there's the story of visibility. Meghan has always been a public figure, of course, an actress with television credits and an instantly recognizable face. But after her marriage into British royalty, the way she approached Hollywood changed. She didn't return as an actress in the traditional sense. She returned as a global personality, a former duchess, someone whose every move carried international headlines. Hollywood thrives on news stories, but it also resents those who wield celebrity like a weapon, who can shape the narrative without paying dues, without the traditional steps of insider respect. And that perception has lingered. Next, there's the problem of authenticity, or at least the perception of it. Hollywood is filled with actors, producers, and publicists who carefully cultivate their image. They understand the dance of vulnerability versus control. And Meghan, whether intentionally or not, has often straddled conflicting narratives. One week, she's advocating for privacy. The next, she's launching a high-profile project or attending a gala where cameras swarm her. One moment, she speaks about equality and humility. Another, she's photographed in a setting dripping with opulence. To many in Hollywood, this duality reads as inconsistency, or worse, contrivance. And that's just the public-facing story. Behind the scenes, whispers have accumulated over the years about meetings that never materialized, pitches that were delayed or canceled, favors requested that were denied. Hollywood insiders, who operate on networks and trust, saw Meghan's rise and her selective alliances as a form of power they couldn't control. That breeds resentment. Consider the subtle ways this resentment manifests, not through tabloids alone, but through social signals. Invitations that don't come, projects quietly passed to others, social media collaborations that fizzle. When an actress is carefully monitored by Hollywood's invisible hierarchy, the smallest sign of disfavor can ripple outward. And over time, these small ripples accumulate into a current that flows steadily against the person it targets. Hollywood is also intensely memory-driven. A misstep is rarely forgotten, and Meghan has had her share. Public interviews that critics dissected, comments interpreted as strategic, images posted online that fed narratives of elitism or detachment. Each event, each moment, has been cataloged, analyzed, and referenced later, sometimes years later, by those who want to position themselves against her. In such an environment, even a single parade appearance can trigger layers of latent judgment. Let's add another layer. The optics of royalty in Hollywood. The city admires fame but resents inherited influence. Meghan's time as a duchess gave her a level of prestige and visibility that bypassed the usual Hollywood approval channels. She didn't climb slowly through the ranks. She arrived with the authority of a global figure. For some in the industry, that's a shortcut they can't abide. Hollywood loves power, but only if it's earned according to its own unwritten rules. Meghan's pathway disrupted that hierarchy. And there's the social factor. Hollywood is a network-driven ecosystem. Relationships, favors, and insider knowledge are everything. Meghan has cultivated her own network, often operating parallel to, rather than integrated with, existing Hollywood power structures. That parallel track generates friction. In some cases, former collaborators or acquaintances quietly express disapproval, which then trickles into group chatter, subtly shaping the crowd's energy years later. The seeds of parade night tension were planted long before she stepped onto the boulevard. Then there's perception versus reality, a crucial distinction. Many Hollywood figures might publicly praise Meghan or remain neutral, but perception is what drives social dynamics. When insiders begin to perceive someone as uncooperative, elitist, or unpredictable, that perception is amplified by social media and gossip networks. By 2025, Meghan's public persona had become a lightning rod. Not because she was universally disliked, but because she was universally analyzed, and that constant scrutiny means any misstep is magnified tenfold. We also can't ignore historical comparisons. Hollywood remembers history. They compare figures who break rules, who climb in unconventional ways, to others who follow tradition. Meghan, in many ways, represents a new model of celebrity, global, multi-platform, independent of Hollywood's traditional gatekeepers. That model fascinates some, irritates others, and alienates a number. When she appeared at the parade, she wasn't just herself. She was a symbol. Symbolism matters. In Hollywood, symbolism is often more potent than reality. To the crowd that booed her, Meghan wasn't just an actress or a former duchess. She was a representation of an insider-outsider dynamic, of privilege, of influence operating outside expected norms. That symbolism, combined with years of accumulated micro-frustrations, created the combustible energy that erupted on the boulevard. There's also timing. Context amplifies every action. The 2025 parade came after months of headlines discussing Meghan's upcoming projects, her interviews, her advocacy work, and rumors about her next moves in Hollywood. The crowd was already tuned in. It was primed. They weren't responding to a parade in isolation. They were responding to a series of media narratives that had shaped expectations, perceptions, and emotional reactions. The boo wasn't random. It was a culmination. And yet, for all this resentment and tension, there's another layer: curiosity and fascination. Hollywood's attitude toward Meghan is paradoxical. She's both resented and admired. People criticize her, yet watch her every move. They analyze her expressions, mimic her style, and anticipate her next appearance. This simultaneous fascination and contempt is critical to understanding why the crowd reacted the way it did. They were emotionally invested. An emotional investment can explode in unpredictable ways. So, the boos, the chants, and the tension weren't just about a single parade moment. They were a reflection of the city's complex relationship with Meghan Markle. Admiration and envy, fascination and frustration, acceptance and resistance. This was a culture reacting to a person who doesn't fit neatly into its categories. And that reaction wasn't superficial, it was visceral. Finally, there's one more crucial factor: expectation versus reality. Hollywood had certain expectations for Meghan's behavior, her appearance, and her interaction with the public. When she walked directly through the crowd, making herself accessible in a way that her handlers may not have anticipated, she disrupted the expected order. That disruption created cognitive dissonance. The crowd saw someone they were conditioned to treat with awe behaving in a more vulnerable, human way. And when humans encounter vulnerability, their responses can swing wildly, from empathy to mockery, from cheers to boos. All of these layers, the accumulated perceptions, the insider frustrations, the symbolic weight of her presence, the timing, and the unexpected choice to walk through the crowd, set the stage for the explosion we witnessed. Hollywood didn't turn against Meghan in a single night. It happened over years, through subtle dynamics and small actions that accumulated into a tidal wave of response. The parade was merely the trigger, a visible flashpoint where all the hidden tensions became public. And here's the detail that will make your jaw drop. The very first person to boo wasn't a stranger. It was someone from within this ecosystem who had observed, judged, and tracked Meghan's every move for years. Someone whose presence alone added layers of personal tension to an already charged atmosphere. That intersection of public scrutiny and private history is what made the event unforgettable, and what turned a festive Christmas parade into a moment analyzed across Hollywood for weeks. But what happened next would push the tension beyond anything anyone expected, and it wasn't just the crowd that reacted. Inside the parade's perimeter, Meghan herself had a realization that changed everything. "Yacht Princess leave." The chant echoed down Hollywood Boulevard, sharp and unrelenting, like a sudden gust of wind ripping through the glittering decorations. Short, memorable, brutally effective. Those 4 words instantly became the defining soundbite of the 93rd annual Hollywood Christmas Parade. They ricocheted across social media, dominated headlines, and were replayed endlessly in video clips and GIFs. But have you ever stopped to wonder where it actually came from? Who planted that seed in the crowd, and why did it ignite so explosively? Most people assumed it started online. A viral post, a TikTok, a meme shared 1,000 times before the parade. That's the popular narrative. But the truth is far more fascinating and far more personal. The chant didn't originate in the anonymity of the internet. It started long before anyone uploaded a video, long before Meghan walked down the boulevard. It started in the private circles of Hollywood insiders. Hollywood is a city obsessed with labels. One nickname can stick for years, shaping perception more than interviews, more than appearances, more than curated Instagram posts ever could. And the nickname Yacht Princess was one of those rare instances that combined imagination, subtle mockery, and cultural observation. It wasn't malicious at first. It was sardonic. It was the kind of playful jab that insiders sometimes use to poke fun at celebrities who live in luxurious, seemingly unattainable lifestyles. But over time, like any repeated signal, it gained weight. It began at exclusive parties, where A-list guests casually commented on Meghan's choices, lavish vacations, high-profile charity events, and extravagant appearances. Someone would joke, "There goes the yacht princess again," and others would laugh. It was harmless banter, a private joke circulating among people who had access and insight. But private jokes in Hollywood rarely stay private. The entertainment industry has a long memory and a long reach. Someone mentions it once, someone else mentions it again, and suddenly a term that began as playful ridicule becomes a subtle social code, a shorthand for criticism without appearing overtly hostile. Then came the whispers in social media management circles. Agents, PR strategists, and talent managers, some working with Meghan directly or indirectly, began to notice the nicknames surfacing in conversations, in off-the-record reports, in private chat rooms. It wasn't widespread yet, but it was consistent. In the world of celebrity image control, consistency matters more than volume. Patterns, repeated over time, shape audience perception. And the label Yacht Princess became one such pattern. By the time 2025 rolled around, the nickname had crossed into public consciousness, but in a very specific way. Online chatter existed, but it was mostly confined to niche forums, gossip websites, and private discussions among entertainment journalists. The moment that pushed it into mainstream awareness, the moment that primed the crowd at the parade, was carefully orchestrated by Hollywood insiders who recognized that Meghan's public appearances had become predictable. These insiders knew that walking through a crowd without strict security would make her vulnerable, not just physically, but emotionally. Vulnerable enough that an audience already aware of the nickname could use it as a signal, a way to voice criticism in real time. What's fascinating is how organic it felt. The crowd wasn't handed scripts, wasn't briefed on talking points. The energy was self-generated. People watching had seen headlines, social media reactions, and interviews. They sensed a pattern. And when the first voice called out, "Yacht Princess, leave," the signal caught fire. Humans are wired for mimicry, for echoing strong social cues. That single spark ignited a chorus, a chant, a collective decision to vocalize what had simmered in whispers for years. But let's take a step back. Why did this nickname resonate so strongly? Why did it strike a nerve, not just with casual parade goers, but with seasoned Hollywood observers? It wasn't just a jab at luxury. It was shorthand for something deeper, perceived entitlement, perceived detachment, perceived manipulation of public attention. The word, yacht, implies opulence, distance, separation from ordinary life. Princess suggests status, hierarchy, authority, and a life curated by titles rather than achievements alone. Combine the two, and you have a phrase that encapsulates both admiration and resentment. It's playful, but it's loaded with criticism. And in the charged environment of Hollywood, that combination can explode into vocal expression. There's also the emotional aspect. For the crowd, chanting, "Yacht Princess, leave," was not just about Meghan. It was about participation in a cultural moment. It was about expressing an opinion that had been socially acceptable only in private spaces until that night. It was cathartic. And for those in the crowd, seeing someone of Meghan's stature physically present, within reach, amplified that impulse. Physical proximity matters psychologically. Distance allows judgment to remain abstract. Up close, the judgment becomes immediate, personal, tangible. And that closeness transformed the nickname from a private joke into a public declaration. Another layer is the narrative of Hollywood itself. The city thrives on spectacle, on stories of rise and fall, on drama unfolding in real time. Every public appearance is scrutinized, analyzed, and contextualized within a larger mythology. The chant, "Yacht Princess, leave," was instantly interpreted not as a random heckle, but as a statement about power dynamics, celebrity privilege, and the consequences of navigating Hollywood with both insider and outsider status. It told a story before Meghan had even reacted. The audience had already positioned her in their narrative. And here's where it gets more personal. The very first person to call out the nickname wasn't a random stranger. As we mentioned in Chapter 1, it was someone Meghan recognized, someone whose presence alone added pressure to the performance. That individual had been part of the inner circles observing, evaluating, and yes, sometimes quietly judging Meghan for years. Their choice to vocalize the nickname wasn't just opportunistic. It was deliberate, calculated, and informed by a deep understanding of the impact that a live audience can have on a celebrity's behavior. The crowd, once the chant began, became almost symbiotic with this first voice, each person feeding off the energy of the next. The rhythm, the timing, the volume, all amplified naturally. In psychology, this is known as social facilitation. The presence of others performing a behavior increases the likelihood of someone else performing it. What began as a single expression of criticism snowballed into a collective performance, one that captured the attention of journalists, cameras, and online audiences. And while the crowd chanted, Meghan's team was scrambling. Security personnel whispered into earpieces, trying to anticipate the trajectory of the chant, wondering if it would escalate. PR strategists frantically considered whether to intervene or allow the moment to play out. Some wanted her escorted immediately, fearing the optics of public disapproval. Others recognized the impossibility of fully controlling a live crowd and worried more about damage control after the fact. It was a moment of tension where preparation collided with unpredictability, and unpredictability almost always wins. Interestingly, this chant also tapped into a larger cultural sentiment. Hollywood audiences are highly attuned to perceived inauthenticity. Over the years, Meghan's efforts to project a polished, philanthropic, and globally aware persona had created admiration in some quarters and skepticism in others. The chant acted as a release valve for that skepticism, a moment where people could express their doubts, frustrations, and judgments, encapsulated in a simple, repeatable phrase. And the power of simplicity can't be overstated. Yacht Princess Leave is short, snappy, and visually evocative. It's easy to remember, easy to repeat, and easy to amplify on social media. Within seconds of its first utterance, it became a shared cultural signal, a way for the crowd to coordinate and align their voices. It's a reminder of how words, chosen carefully or accidentally, can crystallize collective emotion in ways that no PR campaign could fully predict or prevent. But here's the kicker. The chant's impact wasn't just in its auditory effect. It also had a visual dimension. Some audience members held up signs with the same phrase. Others gestured in unison, and smartphones captured these moments from multiple angles. For those watching remotely, it looked like a coordinated effort, though in reality it was organic, spontaneous, and fueled by layers of historical perception. The combination of sound, sight, and social context created a moment of amplified intensity. One that ensured the nickname would be forever associated with that parade, that appearance, and that moment in Meghan's career. And just as the chant gained momentum, Meghan's own micro-reactions were captured. A brief tightening of the lips, a pause in her stride, a glance toward the source of the first shout. That flicker of recognition, that subtle acknowledgement of the nickname, added fuel to the fire. It confirmed, even to the audience, that the chant was not random. It was noticed. It landed. It mattered. And this is where our story takes a turn. The origin of the chant is not only about Hollywood insiders, private jokes, or viral potential. It's about personal history, about private grievances spilling into a public stage. The person who vocalized it first had the power to shape the moment. Their voice was the spark that transformed a private nickname into a public spectacle. And as Meghan processed this realization in real time, she was about to face a choice. How to respond, how to maintain poise, how to navigate a crowd that had suddenly become both judge and jury. Imagine this. The lights of Hollywood Boulevard glitter, reflecting off storefronts and floats, while thousands of cheering families and fans line the streets. A holiday parade, meant to be a spectacle of joy, music, and warmth. And in the midst of it all, Meghan Markle steps into view, not on a float as originally planned, but walking through the crowd herself. Every eye turns, every camera lifts. She's center stage, framed by the chaos and festivity alike. At first glance, it seems like a carefully orchestrated PR move, an attempt to humanize, to appear approachable, to create a viral holiday moment that could dominate social media. But almost immediately, the plan begins to unravel. Because in Hollywood, appearances are everything, but timing, context, and audience perception can make or break even the most polished moves. And Meghan's entrance was a perfect example of how a calculated attempt at charm can backfire spectacularly. Let's break down why. First, consider the intended strategy. Walking through the crowd was supposed to signal approachability. Unlike the safety of a float, walking among fans allows for closer interaction, selfies, handshakes, and the illusion of accessibility. It's a tactic used by many celebrities to appear grounded, relatable, and in touch with their audience. The hope: casual charm translates into viral content, which translates into positive media coverage, which translates into goodwill. But here's the problem. No PR strategy can account for the psychological preparation of the crowd itself. The people lined along Hollywood Boulevard weren't neutral observers. They had been primed for months by social media speculation, tabloid narratives, and insider whispers. Remember the nickname Yacht Princess? That single term had already created an undercurrent of tension. The audience wasn't there to simply cheer. They were there to judge. And in that context, walking into their midst transformed a PR move into a high-stakes social experiment. And the optics? They were immediately compromised. As Meghan moved through the crowd, cameras captured every flicker of her expression, the tightening of the jaw, the slight pause in her stride, the momentary glance toward the origin of the chant. For viewers at home, these subtle signals read as discomfort, anxiety, or even defiance. The intended message of approachability collided with the reality of live audience judgment, creating a visual contradiction: smiling but tense, confident but exposed. Now add another layer: Hollywood's own culture of spectacle and performance. In this industry, authenticity is currency, but it must be earned, carefully curated, and consistent with previous public perception. Meghan's dual persona, royalty turned celebrity activist, creates a challenge. Audiences are primed to detect inconsistencies, to sense when someone is performing for effect rather than reacting naturally. Walking through the crowd was supposed to convey authenticity, but in an environment already charged with expectations and criticism, it had the opposite effect. It magnified every micro-expression, every moment of hesitation, and every perception of entitlement. And here's the kicker: proximity. Unlike walking down a red carpet or waving from a float, being physically immersed in a crowd exposes a celebrity to unpredictability. Voices, gestures, and spontaneous reactions are amplified. A single shout, a chant, a boo, any of these can become viral in seconds. In Meghan's case, the nickname Yacht Princess had already seeded the crowd psychologically. Her physical presence among them created a direct line between perception and reality. The PR move intended to create closeness instead magnified vulnerability. But it wasn't just vulnerability. It was tension, a palpable energy that shifted the parade's atmosphere from celebratory to charged. Families clutching hot cocoa looked around in surprise. Influencers quickly raised cameras higher to capture the unfolding spectacle. Journalists whispered into microphones, trying to anticipate the story before it fully emerged. And Meghan, navigating this crowd, had to process it all in real time. The boos, the chant, the flashes, the whispers, the micro-expressions of recognition, the unexpected presence of insiders in the audience. Which brings us to the next point: timing and preparedness. PR moves, no matter how calculated, are vulnerable to timing errors. In Meghan's case, the entrance was likely timed to maximize exposure during the parade's most televised moments. But the crowd's energy was unpredictable. The first boo, the chant, the spreading wave of disapproval. These were all variables the PR team couldn't fully control. In live settings, unpredictability is inevitable, and in Hollywood, unpredictability can spiral into a narrative crisis within seconds. And let's talk about narrative framing. PR moves are about controlling storylines. Walking through the crowd was supposed to frame Meghan as approachable, relatable, and engaged. Instead, the crowd reframed the story themselves. The chant, "Yacht Princess, leave," dominated the narrative. In the age of social media, controlling perception is almost impossible once a live, emotionally charged event occurs. Every camera angle, every video clip, every retweet reinforced the public perception that the intended message had failed. Consider also the human element. Meghan's personal awareness of her surroundings is critical. She knew the crowd was primed, she knew the nickname had been circulating, and she likely recognized some of the individuals in the audience. That awareness, however, introduces its own tension. Acting naturally while aware of judgment is difficult, even for seasoned public figures. Every smile must be measured, every wave calibrated, every footstep deliberate. In such high-pressure scenarios, even the smallest misstep can be magnified, and every micro-expression becomes fodder for public analysis. And indeed, that is exactly what happened. Analysts, influencers, and casual viewers alike dissected every detail. The slightest hint of hesitation became a talking point. The pause to acknowledge the first boo evolved into speculation about Meghan's confidence, composure, and intent. Social media, as it always does, amplified these details, turning minor gestures into evidence of a larger narrative, that the PR move had gone horribly wrong. Now, ask yourself, have you ever planned something meticulously, only for the environment around you to completely undermine your intentions? For Meghan, walking through the crowd was supposed to generate goodwill. Instead, it highlighted vulnerability, provoked a chant, and triggered a media firestorm. It was a lesson in how even the best-laid plans in Hollywood can unravel in seconds when the human factor intervenes. And let's not overlook the psychological impact on Meghan herself. Walking through that crowd, hearing the chant echo off buildings, recognizing the faces of insiders who had long observed and critiqued her career, she faced a unique combination of stress, visibility, and emotional exposure. How does a person reconcile the dual reality of public scrutiny and personal awareness in real time? Meghan's composure, smile intact, wave ongoing, belied the internal calculations happening in milliseconds. Every step was a negotiation between public perception and private reaction. And the result? A PR move designed to humanize became a spectacle of scrutiny. What was meant to be a strategic choice turned into a live case study of how audiences, insiders, and media narratives interact to amplify vulnerability. Every intention, every calculated gesture, was reframed by the crowd itself. The audience didn't just observe, they actively participated in shaping the story, creating a moment that would dominate headlines for days, if not weeks. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. This wasn't the end of the PR debacle. The entrance, while technically executed, triggered a chain of reactions backstage, among the parade organizers, Meghan's handlers, and even other celebrities present. Confusion, whispered debates, and frantic coordination unfolded behind the scenes, unnoticed by the public, but crucial in understanding the fallout. Security recalibrated. Social media teams monitored every second. PR strategists debated whether to intervene or let the moment play out. And that decision, or indecision, would dramatically influence how the next critical moments unfolded. Because in Hollywood, it's rarely the first mistake that defines a story. It's the ripple effect. And Meghan's entrance, the PR move that seemed clever on paper, was about to create waves that no amount of preparation could contain. The first boo was a spark. The chant, "Yacht Princess, leave," was a flicker of fire. But within moments, the energy on Hollywood Boulevard escalated into something that no one, neither parade organizers nor Meghan's handlers, could fully anticipate. What started as a single expression of disapproval became a wave, a tidal force of emotion that seemed to surge through the crowd, feeding on itself and growing stronger with every heartbeat. Have you ever witnessed a moment where a single action spirals beyond anyone's control? where the atmosphere transforms from calm celebration to unpredictable chaos. That's exactly what happened that night. And it all began the instant Meghan stepped into the crowd, the glittering lights of the parade reflecting off her carefully chosen outfit, a symbol of both glamour and accessibility. The crowd's initial surprise quickly morphed into collective participation. Children pointed, adults whispered, and social media influencers raised cameras, capturing every angle. Smartphones became live broadcast tools, and suddenly, what was meant to be a local parade moment was transforming into a viral spectacle. People began repeating the chant, some with a tinge of humor, some with genuine frustration. Every new iteration added volume, confidence, and intensity. One of the most fascinating aspects of this escalation was the psychology behind it. Humans are wired to mimic behavior, especially in large groups. Social psychologists call this behavioral contagion. The first voice emboldens the second encourages the third, and soon the entire crowd participates, often in ways individuals wouldn't in isolation. That's exactly what happened here. From scattered boos to a full-throated chorus, the crowd transformed into an active agent, shaping the event itself. And it wasn't just noise. The energy was tangible, almost physical. The air seemed to vibrate with tension. Parents holding children leaned forward, unsure if they were witnessing something playful or something charged. People holding signs and banners found their words amplified, their gestures emboldened by the collective momentum. For Meghan, walking through this charged atmosphere was more than just a PR challenge. It was an emotional gauntlet, testing her poise and resilience in real time. Then came the unexpected layers, personal recognition and insider dynamics. Among the crowd were individuals who had known Meghan for years, former colleagues, acquaintances, or people familiar with her Hollywood trajectory. Their presence added complexity to the chaos. When they joined in with the chant or made gestures of recognition, it created a dual narrative, public scrutiny intertwined with private history. Meghan was facing not just a crowd of strangers, but an audience of people who understood the nuances of her career, her persona, and her past decisions. And the chant itself? Yacht Princess, leave, became a kind of mantra, repeated with increasing rhythm and intensity. The cadence of the words gave the crowd cohesion. In seconds, it was no longer a spontaneous shout. It was a coordinated, emotionally charged wave. Social media amplified the effect. Clips of the chant spread within minutes, creating a feedback loop. The crowd witnessed others online reacting to the moment in real time, which further fueled their own intensity. This escalation created a dilemma for Meghan's team. Security personnel were trained for physical protection, crowd control, and maintaining order. PR strategists were trained for narrative management, crafting statements, and guiding media perception. But this situation required instantaneous judgment calls under conditions of uncertainty. The chant, the boos, the crowd's energy, all unpredictable variables, tested their skills and strategies. Every decision, every hesitation, every move could be scrutinized, misinterpreted, or magnified. Meanwhile, Meghan's own response was a study in high-pressure performance. Maintaining composure while processing a barrage of social, emotional, and professional stimuli requires immense focus. Every micro-expression, every shift in posture, every glance had consequences. A slight smile could be interpreted as smugness. A pause could be read as fear. A wave could be dismissed as performative. For Meghan, the stakes were astronomical. In real time, she had to balance the audience's expectations, her own emotional response, and the potential ripple effects of every gesture. And yet, for all the control she exerted, the crowd continued to escalate. It wasn't just a few individuals anymore. People began chanting in unison, rhythmically, almost musically. Each repetition built momentum, creating a sense of inevitability. The energy was both mesmerizing and unnerving. For a moment, it seemed as if the crowd itself had become a character in this unfolding narrative, a living, breathing entity shaping the story as much as Meghan herself. There were flashes of chaos beyond the chanting. People tried to take selfies, inadvertently jostling each other. A few shouted additional phrases, some sarcastic, some accusatory. Security moved through the crowd, trying to contain movement without appearing confrontational. Meghan's handlers whispered instructions, trying to navigate the tension without escalating it. The energy was electric, unpredictable, and impossible to fully control. And then, the chant took on a life of its own. It spread down side streets, reverberating off buildings, spilling into areas where cameras captured it from multiple angles. Journalists and media crews quickly realized they had stumbled upon a story far more dynamic than anticipated. The combination of live reactions, digital amplification, and historical context created a perfect storm for viral attention. Within minutes, clips began circulating on social media platforms, turning a localized parade moment into a global conversation. But there's a subtle detail often missed in this narrative: the emotional layering within the crowd. Some participants chanted out of humor, some out of judgment, some out of genuine frustration with Meghan's public persona, and some out of curiosity, fueled by the viral potential of the moment. It's rare for a crowd to be so emotionally heterogeneous, yet unified in action. The chant became both a mirror and a magnifier of collective sentiment, reflecting years of perception while simultaneously amplifying it. At the same time, Meghan's presence had unintended effects on the crowd's social dynamics. People who might have remained passive were emboldened. Observers became participants. The chant created an implicit permission structure. If others were expressing disapproval, individuals felt socially allowed, even compelled, to join in. That's why what began as a handful of voices rapidly escalated into hundreds, even thousands, all participating in a singular expression of judgment. And amidst the chaos, Meghan continued to navigate forward. Every step required precision, awareness, and emotional discipline. She maintained her outward composure, but internally, the experience was a balancing act of perception management, self-control, and instantaneous strategic calculation. Each glance toward the source of the chant, each acknowledgement, even the smallest nod or smile, was loaded with consequence. It was a performance of both resilience and diplomacy under conditions of extreme scrutiny. Yet, the escalation didn't stop there. As the chant gained momentum, cameras zoomed in on moments of tension, someone raising a hand in mock salute, a slight hesitation in Meghan's stride, a subtle tightening of her jaw. These micro-behaviors, imperceptible in isolation, became magnified in the context of the chant. Analysts and commentators dissected every detail, feeding a narrative of confrontation, vulnerability, and spectacle. And here's the critical point. This moment illustrated a fundamental truth about public perception, celebrity culture, and live events. No amount of planning, PR strategy, or security presence can fully control a dynamic human environment. Once the first spark ignites, whether a boo, a chant, or an unexpected reaction, the crowd writes its own story. And in Hollywood, that story is amplified, replayed, and analyzed endlessly. The most shocking aspect? The crowd's energy was only going to intensify. The initial chant had set a precedent, signaling what was acceptable, what could be expressed publicly, and how powerful a seemingly small nickname could become. It started as a ripple, barely noticeable over the chorus of chants, a figure at the edge of the crowd who wasn't simply shouting. This wasn't a stranger in a Santa hat or a parent holding a child. This was someone Meghan recognized instantly, someone whose presence carried history, judgment, and a subtle power she couldn't ignore. A single person, amplified by the crowd, became the focal point of her attention, and suddenly the dynamic of the parade shifted. Have you ever been in a situation where one person's gaze or voice changes the meaning of an entire event? That's exactly what happened. As Meghan moved forward, the figure stepped closer, eyes fixed on her, voice now projecting above the collective chant. "Yacht Princess leave," repeated again, clearer, sharper, more intentional. Unlike the general crowd noise, this voice carried recognition, almost accusation. It was personal. Immediately, Meghan's body language shifted. A subtle tightening of the shoulders, a pause in her step. Not because she was startled, but because she understood the stakes. Facing the source of a public chant isn't just a physical encounter. It's psychological. It's a moment where past perceptions collide with present reality, where history, rumor, and social narrative converge. And in Hollywood, those moments are magnified exponentially. The identity of the first chanter was revealing. Not an anonymous heckler, not a random member of the public, but someone deeply connected to Hollywood circles. A journalist who had followed Meghan for years, someone who knew the nuances of her career, her interviews, and her personal choices. Their decision to vocalize the nickname in public wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, a calculated move that leveraged both the crowd's energy and the weight of insider knowledge. And the crowd sensed it. When Meghan's eyes locked briefly with the source, a new tension surged. The chant grew louder, more rhythmic, more coordinated. People subconsciously mimicked the intensity they perceived between Meghan and the source. In social psychology, this is known as emotional contagion. One person's emotion or energy spreads to others in the group. The source's intent, combined with Meghan's recognition, amplified the collective response, escalating the parade from chaos to confrontation. For Meghan, the situation required split-second decision-making. Maintain composure and continue forward, acknowledge the voice in some way, or attempt to navigate away. Every choice carried consequences. Smile too warmly, and it could be read as smugness or defensiveness. Glance too briefly, and it could be seen as fear or avoidance. Speak, and her words might be interpreted, misinterpreted, and replayed endlessly. In live events, micro-decisions like these are magnified in real time, shaping both perception and narrative. But Meghan did something unexpected. Rather than recoiling or visibly reacting with discomfort, she paused for a fraction of a second, allowed a subtle nod to her own awareness, and continued forward. It was a controlled acknowledgement, a demonstration of poise, but it also signaled recognition. The crowd immediately picked up on the nuance. That tiny gesture was enough to further energy.